after the World Bank has published India's development report, we are joined by senior economist Dhruv Sharma at the World Bank. Of course, he's also the author of this report. So thank you for sharing your highlights. And of course, there's a lot there that has been mentioned about India's economy. But to begin with, what led to the moderation of India's growth forecast?
We have revised our forecast from 6.6% to 6.3% in this current edition. And there are two main reasons for this. One is that the challenging external environment remains. There are still pressures when it comes to inflation. There's some financial sector turmoil going on globally, US and Europe. There was a significant deceleration in economic growth last year as well. On the domestic front, one of the main reasons for the slight moderation in our growth projections is the moderation in growth that we see in private consumption.
Right. So coming to weak consumption levels and the weak consumption growth, your thoughts really on the solution and when can India overcome this? Also the curve really that India is looking at.
Sure. If I start from the big picture first, we're optimistic on India. 6.3% for GDP growth this year is something that is commendable. India will remain one of the fastest growing economies in the world. When it comes to the question about moderation in consumption growth, there are a couple of stories here. One is that higher income households have propped up consumption growth. There are some weaknesses when you think about rural and lower income households. That is something that we're monitoring closely, and the government has a number of support programs that will help support vulnerable households in a time of need.
All right. Now, of course, you've mentioned inflation and how globally that remains a battle. So when do you think India can really see core inflation easing at least?
So our projections for headline inflation this year are about 5%, 5.2 exactly. That means that India's headline inflation will be within the RBI's comfort range of 2 to 6%. It was higher than that last year. A large part of that story is due to easing pressure from food and fuel. We're expecting that to continue this year and next year as well. And one of the challenge that policymakers have all around the world is the trade-off between inflation and growth. And as far as we can tell, our assessment is that it's being managed carefully and prudently so far in India.
So what are the challenges that India has? Of course, we've said India has been resilient. But what are the challenges for the near term that India has to battle and as well as the long run?
Sure. If you characterize some of the near-term challenges, they are centered on what happens globally. There are some, the effect of spillovers on the Indian economy are expected to be small, much less than they were 10 years ago. So this is where the main message of our report, which is resilience, comes into play. And the impact of these spillovers is expected to be less than other emerging market economies. Domestically, the challenges in the medium term relate particularly to plugging critical gaps in productivity, in employment, in infrastructure, and the government has put forward and is keenly aware of all of these gaps and has put forward a number of policies. The commitment to improving logistics in India is a central pillar of the government's policy to plug that gap. The commitment for infrastructure investment, we've seen public infrastructure investment increase significantly over the last 2 years. And when it comes to thinking about labor market, the government has thought very carefully about what it can do to boost female labor force participation rates in India too.
All right. Lastly, what are your thoughts on India's fiscal consolidation?
We expect fiscal consolidation to continue, and we welcome the government's efforts to commit to its fiscal consolidation path. During crisis, of course, government support does increase, and the withdrawal of some of the support measures needs to be measured, and it needs to be done at a timely in a timely manner. And we welcome the government's commitment to that, as well as a prioritization in an environment where they are consolidating to things like green investments and infrastructure investments as well.
All right. Thank you so much for this interaction and your time. Thank you.